start us off, right? Everything starts from a foundation of love. Yes, we'll just lay that down right now. Everything that we do starts from a foundation of love. There's a video that I want to show you. It's one of my favorite videos. It's a woman, her name is Maggie Baron Keatsey, and I think you will enjoy this video, and it'll be our foundation for the day. Good, good. I don't know about you. This is one of my favorite videos. You can find it on YouTube. This is actually the shorter version. There's a longer version of it. Um, so there's another story about Maggie that she's doing all this good work, and so people want to kill her. They want to take her out. So a soldier came to her house to kill her, and she said, "Wait, wait, wait! You don't want to kill me. That's not what you want to do." And the soldier is like, yes, I do. They have orders to kill you. She said, no, 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 you don't want to kill me. What you want is a better life. That's what you want. You want a better life. I can help you. I can help you. Come on. Come on in. We'll get you some food. We'll get you out of that uniform. We'll get you set up. And he became her driver. Yeah. Yeah. So when we think about the ministry that we're doing together, um, really is this foundation of love, right? That we invent, we create, we serve, we preach, we pray, we do all of these things because it comes from this core of love, right? We invent these things, comes from the core. Today we're going to talk about three things that I think are elements of that. So how do we love? How do we engage people? How do we love people as we engage them? And I think there are three things. And also, can everybody just say hi to the people who are on Zoom? Hi, they're on this one here. Y'all can't see, I'm waiting for everybody. All right. So you can probably already tell I'm not going to be doing all the talking here. I'm sorry, introverts. Surprisingly, I'm an introvert at heart. Like after this weekend, I will go into serious introvert recovery. That is under something hiding. But so I apologize for it. But you have to talk to some folks today. For those of you who love to talk, go for it. Go for it. So we're gonna one of the first things we're gonna talk about is relationship. And I would love, oh, I'm clicking on the wrong thing. I would love for you to just take a minute and think about the best relationship you've ever had. And what are some characteristics of the relationship? Before you talk to folks about it, take about 30 seconds to just think about it on your own. One of the best relationships, parent, partner, crush, friend, teacher, coach. Like, what was one of the best relationships, and what made it the best relationship? What were some characteristics from that? All right. So today you will notice that I'm going to time box a lot of things, right? Because we have pastors in the room. Sometimes pastors have a lot to say, right? So I'll time box some things so we can get through the stuff. Just throw out some of the things that you heard. What are some words that you heard from the other person? You're like, oh yeah, me too. What are some words that you heard? With trust, what else? Respect, truth telling, longevity, communication. Yes. What was the other? Insight. No fear. Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, yeah, that's good. Some of these things like trust and respect and um, communication are things we often miss when we're in church, right? And so some of the best relationships we've had, personally, that doesn't always translate into our relationships at church. And it doesn't translate to the folks we bless outside of our buildings, right? And so we're going to unpack that just a little bit this morning, actually. So keep that in mind. Keep that going through the day. Keep this best relationship. And like, what did that feel like? What was that season like with that person? What did it feel like for you? And how might you be able to, not all of those characteristics, but some of those characteristics, how does that translate into our church community and our community outside of the walls of our church? And so we're going to talk about relationship. There's so many things we could say about relationship, but what I really want to talk about is the fact that relationship requires a high level of empathy and deep listening. When you think about the best relationship you've ever had, did that person listen to you? They were all into it, weren't they? Tell me more. I want to know. I want to know. Has anybody ever had a crush? You don't have to fess up. I'll fess up to it. I had a crush on a kid. You don't want to hear this story. I'm going to tell it anyway because it's Saturday morning. I had a crush on a kid named Chris in high school. He was a junior and I was a freshman. I was in ninth grade. And I just knew I was going to marry Chris. Chris Blake was his name. I'll give his whole name because I loved him. And we were able to like get each other's number, and I just waited for the phone to ring. During high school, I lived with my grandmother because she lived across the street from the school, and I just remember like going home like he's gonna call any minute. When will he call? Because I wanted to hear his voice, right? I wanted to know everything I could, and when he calls it, so what? The only thing we did was breathe on the phone. That was all. But I was listening deeply to his breath. As I got older in relationships, right, you learn to listen a little bit more. When you want to be close to somebody, you take a little time. You try to empathize. When they're hurting, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry you're hurting. How can I help? How can I be a part of making this thing better for you? And so it requires this relationship building, this connection with folks. It requires us to listen. There are different ways to listen, right? I'm going to give you two examples. One is the Heinz ketchup, folks. So, you know the glass bottle, right? That's what. How do you get the ketchup out of that one? You do this thing. Somebody said if you tap it on the 57, does that work? Okay, you tap it on the 57 on the top and the ketchup runs out. What's the other way to do? You get the old knife out. That's a disaster because it's gonna go everywhere. But the folks at Heinz they weren't trying to figure out how to help people get the ketchup out of the bottle. They were trying to just how's our ketchup. So they did some focus groups, gave some folks some French fries, and sat down and just watched them. And how is it? Oh, it's great. It's really good. Kind of hitting the bottle. And somebody said, people are really struggling to get that out of the bottle. Oh, what could we do? Now what do? You got a nice little squeeze bottle, and you can put it upside down and it won't drain out. Science, right? And so now, they listen without nobody at the table said, "Can y'all create a better jar?" They just watch. So there are different ways that we can listen. The Ohio State University built some new buildings, and they had a giant, what do you call it, like courtyard in the middle. And they didn't put sidewalks to the buildings yet because they said, we want to see where the students go first. We're going to let them make the pathway, and then we'll the cement now. So for months, they just let kids walk. And then whatever pathway was most worn, they said, that's the way these kids want to get to this building. That's the way they want to get to this building. And then that's the way they laid the cement. So they didn't listen, they didn't sit at a table, but they listened to their feet, right? They listened to the way that they decided to get to the building. And so I'm wondering, as you're thinking about engaging, especially folks outside of your congregation, what are some ways you can listen without having to sit down? There are many different ways when you go into your communities. Where are people hanging out? What are they into? The church in Brooklyn got a grant to do some young adult ministry. And I got to coach them for about 2 years. We were sitting there and they were trying to figure out, what do we do? So the whole conversation was like, young adults, what do they do on Sundays? Somebody finally said they're always at brunch. Brunch is a big thing in Harlem. I'm sure it's a big thing everywhere, but young adults brunch in Harlem is like the thing. They get very fancy, gift up, and they go to brunch. And so one of the young adults at the table said, I mean, we can have brunch. Church has never done that before, right? What does it mean to do brunch? And they started out like we could have brunch at the church. So they did one. And then they listened, they got some feedback from young adults who said, I didn't want to invite anybody because my friends aren't really church folks. So, oh, that's good to know. So they did it again, and they did it at a restaurant in Harlem. They rented the basement. And so more people came because it wasn't in church, but they said, my friends, we can go to brunch wherever, but what's going to make this different? And so this church created a brunch called Better Than Brunch, and it's brunch for young adult entrepreneurs. And so they brought in other young adults who had already started businesses to do talks at brunch. There's a popular show called Black Ink. It's a tattoo show. And so they got the star, because he just happened to live in Harlem, to come to one of their brunches. And I went, and the place was packed with young adults because the smaller group listened. They listened to what the actual need was. A lot of times in church, we try to form ministries and programs, and we don't listen to anybody. We actually don't ask adults what they want. We most definitely don't ask children what they want. How dare we ask a 5-year-old, exactly what do you want to do? I mean, they're liable to say anything, but you'll get some really good insight into what's going on in their 5-year-old heart and their 5-year-old mind. But a lot of times we just kind of jump into it, like, let's create this great Friday night program. And then we try to figure out, well, why aren't the young people showing up? Because they're all at the soccer game. That's why. So what would it look like for the church to go to the soccer game and sponsor this, or just sit there and meet some young people? I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's keep going. So relationship. One of my best friends is Brene Brown. Um, she doesn't know she's my best friend. She is my best friend. She doesn't know it yet. So if you ever meet her, don't ask her if she's my best friend. But I want to watch this video about empathy, and then we'll have a little conversation about it. One or two people, what's sticking out to you from this video? Say it louder.
I tend to do it wrong.
You tend to do it.
It's not so because you feel like you want to make them feel better.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, we want to, and especially for leaders, not pastors alone, but for church leaders, we want to have the answer, right? Oh, this happened. Okay, let me tell you what you should do. Let me tell you where you should go. Anybody else have that? I have that disease of I want the answer. I want to have the answer. What else? What else stuck out to
I
you?
liked when whoever the bear or whatever he was,
Yeah.
he said, "I'm glad you told me." Like, I think that's really
Yeah.
wonderful. I didn't really have an answer for you, but I'm really glad you shared that. And I think I don't do that enough.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's just kind of sitting with it, right?
Yeah.
I have a chaplain friend um, who does this in the most beautiful way. He told the story of a young girl died in a car crash, and he went to the parents, and the mother was, of course, a mess. And she sat next to him and she said, I just don't understand why. Like, why? Was I a bad mother? Is this my fault? Did I do it? And he didn't respond and say a word. And she said, can you tell me? Is it my fault? Did I do this? Was it because of this? Was it because of this? Was it because of this? And he just sat with her. And she said, you don't have anything to say? And he said, no. Except, what do you think? Do you think you were a bad mother? She said, no. No. Tell me about her. She started to talk about her daughter, and so he's like, and what else? And what did you do together? And how did that make you feel? And just kind of let it all out. He didn't say a whole lot of words, but he sat with her, and then she cried, spurts of tears and grief, and he just sat with her. And every once in a while, she would say, But is it my fault? I don't know. I don't know. And he stayed in relationship with them for a little while because he didn't try to make it better for her. He just sat with her and agreed. Anything else stick out to you all from the video? Yeah. When we think about empathy and deep listening, I wanted to just kind of lay out a couple of demographics that we might run into in our churches and in our communities. And so, help me think through some things. How might you show empathy or practice deep listening with children and youth? Well, let's talk practical stuff. One of the things I'd love for y'all to leave with today are ideas and ways to engage, like real practical ways that maybe you hadn't thought of before. I don't have all the answers. I wish I did. I don't. But I do believe they live somewhere, not all of them, but a lot of the answers live right here with all of us. And so, are there ways that you or someone you know has really practiced empathy and deep listening with children and youth, getting down to their level, the power dynamic changes, kind of getting into what they're into? Um, I was an interim pastor for 3 years. I wasn't the best interim pastor because I realized that's not my gift. But and I'll tell you now, I said yes to that church because of their children, the cutest kids ever. Cute kids as my love language and my kryptonite. And so there's a group of maybe like 7 little girls. I don't have the picture to put up, but every Sunday morning, they come from Sunday school and then they knock on the door, and my husband and I would be in the office and had this big oak table in the middle of the office, and they peek in and they say, hmm, they call me Reverend Q, like the letter Q, because the Q was too much. Um, Reverend Q, can we get our stuff? I said, yeah, come get your stuff. Their stuff was a whole shelf of paper, coloring book, markers, crayons, stencil, glitter, all the things in little bags, and they could fill it up and take it to the sanctuary. Come get your stuff. So they get their stuff, and they stand there, and they'd wait for me to say, do you want to sit down? And then they sit down at the table and they break out all the stuff out of the bags, and then they proceed to like color and write. I would sit back with my mug. My husband sit at the desk, and just like very nonchalant. So, girls, like, how was the week? Oh, Reverend Q. Let me tell you what happened in second grade this week. The best conversation was when they explained to me what TikTok was, because they didn't know either. And so it was a lot of fun. Like, you do like a lot of dances. I'm like, yeah, but tell me what, like, how? No, Reverend, listen, you do a lot of dances like this. And then they showed me how to do it. But it was every week, just them coming to the table, and I would ask the same question every week. Tell me about your week. Oh, this happened, and this happened, and then no, that didn't happen. You don't know. You didn't go to my school. Like, it was all of this drama. Then I would have to go to church, and my husband would be the wrangler to get them out. And I would go, and they'd be in a deep conversation. And so he'd be like, "But tell me more," and they would just go on and on and on, and he'd make them clean up and go. But just bringing them right to the table and asking one question. Can you just think back? When was the last time you sat with somebody under the age of 18 and just asked them a question that you didn't already know the answer to? Um, if you are able to gather young people together, one of the coolest activities that I've ever done is, we just did it with the church I was at. Get a group of adults and a group of kids, right? This is nothing new. It's not super innovative, but it is a lot of fun. And you pick like a age range. So everybody's going to talk about when they were in 7th grade. When I say everybody, I mean everybody, adults included. So what was it like for you when you were in 7th grade and you're talking to 7th graders, and the adults, I've never heard so many laughs come out of a room because they're remembering, like, oh, I was horrible when I was in 7th grade. And now they're looking at a 7th grader who they've said, and like, he's horrible. And they're like, oh my goodness, I see myself in this kid. And so now the 7th grader is like, oh my goodness, you were in 7th grade once? Like, I can't believe. So we started to have these really good conversations. So we just made we made 2 lists. what are questions kids can ask adults and questions adults could ask kids, but we did it in a speed dating round. So they would sit like in pairs and then we would go and they would have 3 minutes. And so they're talking really fast and they're trying to get stories out and they're laughing and they're like, oh, switch. And then there's movement all around the room and they get to ask all these really, some of them were super silly. Some of them were really, really deep. And so we framed it so that we would have the silly questions up front and we would go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper until we got to like questions of faith. When you were in 7th grade, you know, what did you believe? Who did you believe God was? So it kind of brings it down, and then we did a big group activity together. So it's simple, but it helped to do some deep listening and to actually empathize with one another, especially with the youth in the room. Let's talk a little bit about young adults. So how many of you have some young adults at your churches? How many of those young adults are in leadership roles? Yes. How many of you don't have very many young adults? You would like some? Yes. um, and some of the folks with young adults in the room who are serving, what are you hearing from young adults as you listen? What are some of their dreams? Like, where is there a thread of what they're kind of want out of life? It's interesting, even pre-pandemic, but now whatever season this is, I want to say post, but I don't know. Wherever we are now, I'm hearing a lot from churches. Um, we're trying to reach our young adults, the kids who grew up in the church. We're going to send them a letter and say, "Hey, your church needs you. Come back." Don't do that. Don't do that. I did have the opportunity to speak with a little group of young adults recently, and they said one of the hardest things was during the pandemic, they felt like they were the ones that were left out from churches who didn't have like a young adult ministry. Said now folks reached out to the children, they figured out virtual school, they reached out to the teenagers, they figured out driveway games, they reached out to my parents, they found out how to do Bible studies and conference with my grandparents. But like it feels like we were left out. We're the class who had to graduate online. We're the ones who had to start new jobs virtually. We were the ones who like went to college and then had to be pod and couldn't speak to anybody else except for the 4 people we were with. And so I'm hearing from young adults like really struggled the past 2 years, and the church kind of just breezed right by them, and either lumped them with the youth or lumped them with the adults. And now churches are like, but we want you back because we need you, because our pews are a little bit more empty. We're trying to figure out how to engage the community. We know you're out there. Young adults, the number one institution they trust are small businesses, not the church, not the school they went to, but they trust small businesses. Why do you think that's true? Why would they trust small businesses? Yeah.
They're invested in their clients.
Yep.
And the community. I mean, branding is a thing.
Yes. Yes. Right. Branding is, small businesses are going to be out on the street. They're going to make sure when you buy something, you're going to get a little note. You buy something on Etsy, you're going to get a handwritten note from Joe in Australia, who's 29, I don't even have my necklace on. I actually bought something from a guy named Joe in Australia, and it got a little note. Hey, I'm so glad you bought. Let me know if you want anything else, but I hope you enjoy it. This was handmade just for you. Oh my goodness, Joe from Australia, you've just become my best friend. But they trust because of the intimacy, because of the trust, because of the connection. That's what they want. They don't need the flash. Children and youth don't need the flash. Don't go buying the lights and the stuff they just want relationship. They just want to know, do you know my name? Do you know who my parents are? There's so many times I've gone to churches and we do listening groups when we're doing assessments, and we'll say, well, how many kids do you have? And then you get somebody counting, well, they're the Jones boys. They're three Jones boys. But what are their names? I don't know. Their mom's Mary, their dad is Steve. But what are their names? I don't know. They're Jones boys. Or, you got the Smith twins. Yeah, but what are their names? I don't know. I can't tell them apart. but I know they're the Smith. What would it be like if you knew young adults' names? You knew who they actually, where are they? I mean, you don't know all their business, but what are they doing out there, right? Where are they hanging out? Are they at brunch? Are they at the park? Are they at the gym? What are they doing? Because they're finding something out there that they're not finding here. I think we've created this gap for them. But really, I think it comes down to this eat listen. I want to skip so that we can move forward to neighbors. Yeah, volunteers, I'll just say this. Everybody wants to know how to keep a good volunteer. You have one? Yeah. How to keep a good volunteer, right? First, don't force them into anything. I was the queen of getting up on Sunday morning and saying, I need volunteers for fourth grade Bible study. If there is no one, then the fourth graders will not know Jesus. So I need somebody guilt you in, and then I get that one person after church like, all right, I'll do it. They don't like fourth graders. They don't even like kids. So I was like the queen of guilt until I realized like there's a better way. We did something called the volunteer call process. Some of you might do this in a same way or a different way. But we created a little call team of trusted folks within our youth ministry, some parents, some of the longtime volunteers, and we just prayed, okay, Lord, show us some new volunteers. And we did exactly what you did. Like, who do the kids run to that aren't their Sunday school teacher, or like, we had a Friday night program, like who are they running to? Um, and we found a couple of folks. We also look for what are some of their gifts that they do? We see it played out in the church, and how could that help us? And then we created job descriptions. So what were the gaps in our ministry that we needed, right? So short little job descriptions that said, this is what we're looking for. This is how long we need you. It's 1 hour every Friday for the next 6 months or 12 months. We had that printed. And after we prayed about it, we came back as a team and said, all right, we got 10 people that we think might fit these different job descriptions. Go to that person. I'll give you this quick one. I went to a woman, her name is Mercedes. I talk about her all the time, so so I went to Miss Mercedes. She was a school nutritionist. She loved creating beautiful plates. And she would do it like, it had to be, she said, if it's not colorful, it's not good. So it had to be colorful, had to be tasty. And so I went to her and said, we need somebody to run our kitchen. We have all been praying about it, Miss Mercedes, and you keep coming up. And she was like, absolutely not. I see kids every single day, and I'm not doing it. I understand that, but I'm asking you to pray about it. And she said, I'll think about it. Miss Mercedes, I said, I'll come back in a week. Came back in a week. Miss Mercedes, did you pray about it? She said, no, because I'm not doing it. Miss Mercedes, come on, just like a little prayer, why don't you? Give me 3 more days, and I'll come back. I came back, and she said, as much as I want to say no, I prayed about it. And I will give you 6 months. You're like, okay, Miss Mercedes. She gave us the first 6, realized this might be her thing, because we had a little team for her. She wasn't alone. We knew exactly what we wanted from her. When her time was up, she was able to leave. I didn't call her into anything else. I didn't ask her to sub for a Bible study. This was her post. After that was over, she said, I'll stay a little while longer, only because I want to make sure that everything is okay. Sure. I left the church and she was still doing the job, y'all. So I'm pretty sure she did this for like 8 years. But every year we would come back and say, Miss Mercedes, what do you need? Do we need to tweak this? Do you want to bow out? Nope, I'm good. And she started to build other leaders. And so we're talking about volunteers, listening to them when they say, I'm tapped out. When you see them come in the door and they're like dragging their left leg, you might want to have a conversation. When they start getting really cranky with folks at the door as they're greeting them, you might want to pull Sally aside and say, let's talk about what's going on. Like, the folks coming in today, do you need to take a break? So even listening to your volunteers before you ask them to volunteer, while you're asking them, and even when they're finished, how are you celebrating your volunteers, right? At the end of a season, how are you celebrating them? Yay, you're making a bunch of noise in the Sunday worship service. Is there something you can offer them? Are you offering breaks? So that's all a part of listening as well. There's a video I want to show you. So there's a church in Indianapolis called Broadway United Methodist Church. You can look them up. They have an amazing story of what it looks like for a church to basically get rid of all of their ministries and start over again, based on listening. Um, the video I'm going to show you is a young man named Daamon Hargis, and Daamon created. Well, he didn't create, but he was asked to the pastor to help listen to the community, right? Pastor said, "Who's in the community and what are they doing?" Daamon said, "I got you. I know everybody. I'm gonna set up meetings with you, pastor, so that you can meet these folks in the community." And so the pastor literally just like he would go out to the neighborhood and meet with people in the community. He would sit on the church lawn and meet with people in the community. Sometimes they come into the building, but it wasn't a meeting about what can you offer us. The pastor really just wanted to know who are you. Um, there's a woman who he got to meet who was a great cook. She cooked for everybody in the neighborhood. When the pastor met her, he said, "Just tell me what you do." She said, "I love to cook." He said, "Would you cook for our next staff meeting?" She said, "Sure, I can do that." He was, "This is amazing." One of the staff members said, "Hey, I'm on the city council board. Could you cater for our next meeting?" She said, "I could. My kitchen's really small though, but I can do it. I can figure it out." And the pastor said, "You can use our kitchen." And so she started to cook for that city council meeting until it went all the way up to like the mayor or somebody is like, "Hey, we got this thing. Are you a caterer?" She's like, "Why, yes, I am." And the church helped her to kind of build her catering business. This all happened because the pastor asked one question: "What do you love to do? What do you do really well? Tell me about it." And started this relationship. So Daamon has created like a task force of roving listeners. They're called roving listeners. And they just go around the neighborhood listening to people's stories and what they're really good at. So this is Daamon, and he's going to talk a little bit about roving listeners. These are the questions that Daamon uses when he's talking to folks. Questions to learn about people's gifts. What three things do you do well enough that you could teach others how to do them? What three things would you like to learn? Who besides God and me is going with you along the way? These are the questions as he's listening to folks kind of nudge people along to have some conversation. We're going to come back to these questions in just a little bit. But when we talk about going out into the community, it's often really, this is what we offer you, right? Food pantries and clothing closets and all these kinds of things. This shifts the dynamic a little bit, right? Because now we're not trying to give you anything other than our ears. We're just trying to give you our time. I believe Broadway is the same church that put tables outside in their parking lot, invited people to come and have lunch. Just sign outside, you want some lunch? Come sit at a table. People were a little skeptical, like, "What do you want from me? You gonna try to baptize me if I come in and have lunch?" Like, "No, just free lunch." And then roving listeners would sit at the tables. "My name is Akila. Hey, what are you really good at? What are three things you're really good at?" And people can answer that question. If they struggle a little bit, then, "Oh, what do you like to do?" You're just starting to learn about folks. So relationship, we spent a lot of time there because I think it's most important. Building trust, building a sense of belonging and community, a intimacy, deep listening, and learning to sit with people even when it's really hard. The other piece is openness. Being open requires a certain level of vulnerability and openness. So when I think about openness, I would be open and vulnerable is to invite people to lead, right? We risk our position and our perfection, but we gain disciples for Jesus, the opportunity to watch God at work. Um, you've heard me tell a little bit of my story of my pastor who really just kind of opened himself up and risked his position. A lot of the other pastors in the city thought he was insane for letting a group of teenagers actually have leadership positions. Like, I think I preached my first sermon when I was 14. I had no idea what I was doing. But my pastor said, "Let's see what happens." And I was like, you want me to preach a sermon? We're gonna see what happens. And he hooked me up with a mentor, and she helped me to get into the text. This is very corny. I was 14. The title of it was called The Happy Meal. And I talked like when you open the Happy Meal, it's like this joy that comes out. You get a prize and you get food. And I was like, I think that's kind of the way Jesus and the Bible works, right? You get a prize and the food. It was a great sermon, by the way. I just tell you. But he risked all of that. Like he risked his pulpit to this 14-year-old kid, and there was another kid who got up too, um, to just open us up to something different. And what that moment did for me was set. I was like, oh, I can do this. This little introverted, shy kid. The more people in the room, the more comfortable I am. So it got me to the point where if there's 3,000 people in the room, that is like warmth to my soul. A first date, I suck. It's a wonder why I'm married. Lord help me. I'm not good one-on-one, but I'm really great with a whole lot of people. But he helped me to figure that out, how to like exegete the text, how to open it up. And the Bible became alive because he let me see it through my own eyes. He was open enough to like just let me explore that. He sat with me. He was vulnerable enough to say, when I asked questions, if he didn't know, I don't know. Let's figure it out together. So there's something when we talk about engaging folks about being open and vulnerable. A lot of time as leaders, again, we want to know everything. We are the pastor. We should know everything. We should have an answer. But what if you don't? What if you don't? What would it mean to say, I don't know, but let's figure it out together? There was a kid whose mom called and said, I think he is going to leave, like, he doesn't love Jesus anymore. I was like, calm down. What's happening? He's gotten into science. He says he doesn't understand any of this stuff. And I was like, great, just the topic I've been before. And so I didn't know what to do. I sat with the kid on the church steps for like 10 minutes. And I said, your mom's worried you don't love God anymore. He said, it's not that. It's just, I'm learning other things. And I said, tell me what you're learning. He proceeded to tell me all these things, science and math and stars. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. He said, what do you think? I think that's awesome. And I think you'll figure it out. And as long as you let me, I'll sit here every Sunday on these steps. You can talk it through. Okay, you don't think I'm gonna, you think I'm in trouble? I think you're brilliant. I think you're gonna make your mom a lot of money one day is what I think. But I'm not worried about it. We'll figure it out. Like we'll walk through this together. So what does it mean to be vulnerable with people, even when you don't know, to be open? When we open the door for leadership across the church, there's an element of risk that will shake, rattle, and rock the congregation. So can you imagine if you let, I won't go as far as preaching a sermon. I don't want y'all to keep me out just yet. We have the afternoon to go. But what would it be like to put a volunteer, not talking about kids, but a volunteer who maybe hasn't volunteered before? You've done the background checks, you've done all the things. In a position, in a new position, like what does that look like to kind of open up leadership a little bit? There are so many people, I think, in congregations who haven't had the opportunity to lead because we haven't asked them. And so we're like, where are we going to find more people to do the things? They're in your congregation. They might be saying to themselves, oh, I'm too old to do this. I've done this already. But there is something else, because there is something that they're good at, something that they love, is something that they would love to teach other folks, right? Who is that in your congregation? Don't worry, you're going to do that work in a minute. I want you to start to think about who in the congregation haven't you had an opportunity to listen to and sit next to and ask questions just about who they are, because you might find a gem of a volunteer there. You might find a gem of somebody who has a ministry in their heart and is exactly what your church needs. But you've never actually sat down and talked to them because they run out really quick on Sunday. But guess what? They might have a phone. You might try to pick up that phone and say, oh, I didn't catch you on Sunday, but I was wondering, you want to catch a cup of coffee? Have a conversation? Can I get you on the phone? From a person who hates talking on the phone, this requires a lot of energy. But if it gets you in conversation with folks, it's well worth it. Just one thing about youth leadership. A lot of times we want kids to be, to take leadership. We want them to do things. There's a term called interagency. It's simply not about creating new positions like children or youth being youth deacons or elders and putting young people and young adults but about not only about putting them at the table to be equals, but it's about recognizing the power they bring to the table and how this might impact their good intentions. So basically, interagency is not like you take a kid and they're going to read a scripture and you're insisting that they read it the way it's always been done, right? They might, don't boo me, but they might understand it if it was read from like the Message translation. They might understand it if they get to act it out or dance it out or draw it out. And so interagency says, what are the things that young people can bring to the table, instead of us saying that this is what you're allowed to bring to the table. But what if we allow them to bring all that they are? That might infuse some energy in what we do, not only on Sunday mornings, but throughout the life of the congregation. Invitation and welcome. Hospitality is more than a smile at the door. Hospitality is an invitation for us to demonstrate God's love, grace, and kindness to those inside and outside our church walls. So what I've heard a lot as churches are coming back into in-person, they're like, one church said, my greeters are grumpy. They have a faithful greeter at the door who will not leave her post, but also she will not smile. And so like she's very, and I know another person, like very like, this is my job, this is what I feel like I want to do, but this is how they're handing out the bulletins and like, come this way to your seat. That's not, yeah. So kind of helping our folks to understand that hospitality is more than just the door, but it actually is the life of the church. How are we being hospitable to one another, right? Beyond the front door. And so this conversation that the pastor has to have with the grumpy person at the door is a little bit more than just at the door, right? It's about the life of the church. So what's going on? Like, how do you see yourself? Is there a sense of belonging for the whole church, or is just this little piece right here? So there's a bigger conversation about what it means to welcome folks, into the whole life of the congregation. Can y'all tell me a little? Oh, actually, this is what I want to do real quick. This is great. Do y'all have access to the Bible on your phone, or maybe you have an actual Bible with you? Anybody? Can I get one person, maybe one or two people at each table? Can you just bring up one of these texts? Let's do Acts 16:25-40 at this table. Let's do Luke 10:38-42 at that table. How about Luke 19:1-10 at this table? And if both of you could do the Acts 16. So I know there's plenty more you can talk about around hospitality, but one of the questions that I would love for you to think about, in a minute, I'm going to ask you to kind of go with your church group or pair, and you're going to find a space to have a little conversation. But before we do that, just take a minute to yourself. You don't have to talk to anybody else right now. But what is the theological story that drives, inspires, or motivates you? Right? So as you're reading this text about these different texts about hospitality, the stories of Martha and Mary, you might be Martha, you might be Mary, I don't know. Zacchaeus, and kind of this reverse hospitality where, Jesus is like, hey, invite me to your house. Let's have this conversation. Lydia, who is, running an Airbnb, having Paul come out every time he came into town. So there might be something stirring in you. Oh, I think my theological story, what drives, inspires, and motivates me might be this hospitality. It might be something different. There are a lot of folks who have like life scriptures, and that's the scripture that drives their whole life. Maybe that's you. So I'd love for you to just take a minute to think about, what is the theological story that drives you, and then what is your hope and vision for the future of the church, right? What is your hope and vision for the future of the church as you're thinking about, this is where I am theologically? Like, this story kind of grounds me in, this is what I dream for the church. This is what I hope. And I wonder if there are any connections with that. I just want you to think on your own. You don't have to talk to anybody. You can even write some notes on a real piece of paper, or on your phone, or on your tablet, or maybe you just want to sit with that for a minute. I give you 2 minutes to reflect on these two questions before we move on. All right. So the last thing we're going to do before lunch, um, if you came with another person or more people from your church, I'm going to ask that you find a spot, not here because we're going to come back here for lunch. We'll take a little break from this room. In the sanctuary, did you say, are there? Another room off the sanctuary, the blue room, where you can meet. There's the library also. There's lots of spaces, sanctuary. Okay. So huddle up with your folks. You're going to have 15 minutes. You're going to discuss, let me give you your assignment. So you're going to discuss ways in which the church, now, this can be the church or your church, a way in which the church might engage and listen to those who are outside the walls of our buildings. You're going to discuss the gifts, skills, and talents you may have that can help your church reach those far from God or those in the community. So basically, how can the church listen better? And what are the gifts and skills you might have, right, that will help your church to reach folks outside? You can take a picture of that. We're going to spend some time talking about what's in your hand. So what do you already have, resources and assets? We're going to have you break up a bit with your church group, outside of your church group, just to get some things out of your head. Oftentimes we work within a mindset of scarcity, right? There's not enough. What are some things that you've heard there's not enough of? What have you heard? Money. There's never enough money. What else? People. What else? Youth. What else? Time. What else? Energy. Yes. Volunteers. There's not enough space. Interest. There's not enough interest. But I dare say that there actually is. There is enough. There's more than enough. Sometimes we have to uncover it. Sometimes we have to help each other find it. Sometimes just a little bit of time to think about it and process it. We realize, oh my goodness, there is enough. We might not recognize that at the beginning. We might say, oh, there's a little more than I thought. And then eventually we get to, oh my goodness, there's an abundance of volunteers. I don't know about time. I'll get back to you on the time one. But there is enough time. So I would love for us to just take a look, grab those Bibles again, however you grab them the first time. And we're going to go to Exodus 4. Does anybody know the story of Moses in the Exodus 4? So we find our dear friend Moses, right? And what's his problem at this point? What's the situation? What is Moses struggling with? Moses.
He has
Stutter, right?
my
And
dad told me that in Sunday school.
Moses, and Moses in Exodus 4, what is he about to do? Like, what is God? Moses, you have to go and do what? You have to go tell Pharaoh. What does Moses say? You got the wrong guy, is what Moses says. You got the wrong guy. And verse 1, Moses answered, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? And then what does the Lord say back to Moses? I gave the answer. He said, what's in your hand? What do you already have, Moses? And what did he already have? He had a staff. Right? So the Lord said, throw it on the ground. Moses threw it on the ground and it became a fantastic. It's just like Sunday school, right? And he ran from it. And the Lord said to him, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. This, said the Lord, is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. So when you hear the story of Moses and you hear the Lord say to Moses, dude, what's in your hand? Like, look, open. You have it right there. How does that feel to you? What kind of thoughts stir up when you hear this story? Anything? What else? Somebody was going to say something. Hmm? Yeah. Can you imagine?
another to tell you what is that gift.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Can y'all imagine though Moses in this moment, terrified? Like he has to go and do this big thing that's never been done before. He has to go in front of big bad Pharaoh, right? To ask this request. Like, how am I gonna, I'm a stutterer. I may or may not have murdered somebody. Um, these folks are dependent on me. There's all this pressure. Lord says, "You're the guy. Go." And I was like, "Dude, I am out. I do not have what it takes." Um, I love that you said it takes. Sometimes it takes for somebody else to say, "But you do. You have exactly what you need." What did Moses do when he did it? So he has a staff. It turns into a snake. What does Moses do? He runs away from it. Like how often do we're like, oh, we have exact. Well, of course we have. We didn't know we had that money there. Okay, but we're not going to touch it because we might need it for a rainy day, right? We might need it. We put it back in the bank and let it just sit there for a little bit and kind of run from these things. What I really hope this afternoon is that you all get to um, encourage one another to see not only what you have personally to offer, but as a congregation, right? As leaders, as pastors, at your church, what do you already have? You already have it. And so I hope you can help each other kind of peel back all of those layers. And that you can give each other some encouragement so that when it is revealed to you, you actually do have more volunteers than you think you might go, oh, but we can't ask the seniors to be the volunteers because they've no because they say that they've done everything, like their kids have gotten older, they're not gonna, so we're not even gonna ask them. Do you know the wealth that you have in your seniors? The wealth of wisdom you have in your folks who know the history of the church, the history of the community, could actually be the answer to moving forward. um, Really cool exercise to do. I don't know if y'all have ever done this before, is to actually assess your community, like the story of your community. What is the story of the folks outside that live out there? How was your town or your city founded? Who was the person who, what is that story? There's a church in Denver, they did this exercise and found out that the city, there was a guy in the little town, his name was Skeeter. I don't know. Sounds like a scholar to me. Skeeter. And Skeeter would sit on his porch and like shoot at the little animals that went by. But Skeeter was kind of the mayor. Skeeter was always outside. Everybody knew who Skeeter was. And so this pastor, she was trying to do a new church start, and she was like, "Oh, so Skeeter was like the unofficial mayor of the town." So she started to think about who are the unofficial mayors in the town now. Started to research and kind of go around the neighborhood, and people knew Miss Emily from down the street, or Mr. George over here, those folks who are always outside, and she began to listen to them. She also found out there's a park where a lot of the unhoused folks hang out. It's kind of the park they all go to. The history of that community is that was the spot where the first gold rush happened. So she said, "Oh my goodness, that's where the gold is." And so one of the missions of her church is to unhouse folks. And she said, "We don't look at them like the dirt, we look at them like gold." So we treat them that way. That's the history of that park. That's where they are. We're going to make sure they're treated in that way. So I wonder, what might be the story of your community, and what it would look like, what it would take for you to kind of learn. You might already know what's the history of your story, and then how does that connect to your mission at your church? That's just a little nugget right there as we talk about what's already in your hand. All right, so I want to let's see. Are you all, you're already sitting with your church folks? Are you kind of sitting next to people you know already? Kind of, sort of. Okay, it's after lunch. I'm gonna have y'all moving a lot because I don't want you to get sleepy. Can you find get into groups of three? But if you can, folks who are not a part of your church. Now I know Faith has a big group, um, so try. But try to get with folks, even if you and y'all know each other really well. I guess pretend like you don't know each other, and try to match up with some folks that you don't know. And I'm gonna give you 5 minutes. not including the time to get to a spot. Groups of 3, try to get with folks you don't know, and you're gonna just talk about this. What is your greatest desire for your church? Yeah. All right. So we're gonna play a little game called Yes and. Where's somebody has a theater kid? Anybody in theater? Yes. Have you played Yes and? Yes and. Have you played Yes and? We're gonna play a little Yes and. So let's say that church has a ministry. We're gonna call it the Heart Issue Ministry, right? You heard kind of the core history of that, like how we started the ministry, right? One of our members had heart surgery, has this passion, realize that other folks in the congregation have also had heart surgery and they want to get out into the community. So I'm going to kick it off. And just like popcorn, if you've ever played this before, you can help me out. I'm going to present an idea of what we could do around that. And you'll go, yes, and we could do blah, 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 blah. So I'm going to say, as a church, we could make little bags, right, with little plush hardy thing in there with a little scripture and then a phone number of somebody's contact. We take them to the hospital and we give them out to folks who are about to have surgery. They know when they come out they have a support group. Yes, and anybody who wants to yes and it. What else could we do?
Yes, and we could have defibrillators on each pew.
We have defibrillators. Okay, all right, just in case, yes.
Yes, and follow up with them after to see if they have here.
Yeah, we could follow up with them after. What else? I like that. Oh, okay. Who else had a great desire? One another table. I'm going yes and it. All right. So a renewed connection, comfortable. What could we do around renewed connection and being comfortable in our community? Something we could do.
We could take a parking lot and offer to various groups to have activities there.
So we got our parking lot. We're gonna offer to people from the outside can use it for. I'm not gonna say it because y'all are gonna yes and it. Yeah.
Yes, and we could have food trucks.
Yes.
For brunch. For brunch. Yes.
Yes, and paint the table.
Ooh. Ooh. Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yes, and we could do trunk or treat.
Yes. Yes. What else?
Yes, and we could host community potluck, community potluck events.
Oh, I like it.
Yes, and we could do a dance party.
Oh yeah, there it is right there. Yeah.
Yes, and that. Yeah.
Yes, and you could do spring fling for seniors in the parking lot. Have them driven in by limo. I'm dreaming big. Yeah. One more. Who has something? One of the tables on this side of the room. Are you shy? Don't yes. Yeah. Yeah. We won't yes and it. We'll say yes. Well, amen it. Do y'all see like how many fun and like creative and engaging things stirred in about 7 minutes? Um, not that we can do all of those things, but y'all, there are ways that you can use your parking lots and things that seem like, oh my goodness, heart surgery. That's a whole ministry right there. How many folks do you know who've had heart surgery, gonna have heart surgery? I mean, all of us have a heart, right? We can walk together. There could be a walking ministry that happens. There's folks who do walking ministry every morning with their phone. They choose the scripture, they FaceTime live as they're walking down the street, and they encourage folks to walk while they're on FaceTime live and engage in this like Bible study while they're walking. It's like 15 minutes. Isn't that cool? And so just trying to get some ideas and get you kind of stirring on, you actually do have everything you need. And your greatest desire for your church is not so out of the ordinary. It's not so far away. It could actually happen. Now, In a minute, I'm going to ask you to go back to your seats, but before you do that, before we talk about the how and the what, we must talk about the who. So we have all these great ideas, the walking ministry, the parking lot, all the things that you want to do. You want to see people come in. But in order to kind of assess what we have, assets, we have to take a look at our who we are, like our identity. So I'm going to give you instructions for building your who, defining your who. What is your church's identity? Um, you're going to actually, there's some blank paper on the table. You're going to grab paper and pen. You don't have to draw the church, but you can if you like. You can make the church look however you want to. You don't have to draw anything. But I would love for you to think about, who are the people in your church? Like, who are the people? You can even name names. Just who do you know? Who are folks who are working in the church? Who comes to mind when you think about people in the church? Programs. What programs do you have that's already up and not? We're not thinking of what we want to see happen. Think of right now. What are programs that are happening? What is the community of the church? Who's in the community? Is it a French community? Is it a community of mostly retired folks? Is it a community of families? What kind of community do you have? What are some of the challenges of your church? Right? Not your community, but of your church. Is it financial challenges? Is it challenges we just can't seem to unify? What kind of challenges does your church have? You're gonna talk about your assets. What do we have? We have this amazing building. You're not talking about what we're gonna do with it yet. We just want to find out what you have. But we have a great parking lot. We have amazing young people that come that's an asset. We have money. Uh, have money, but boy, we got some spirit. I tell you, we've got some good hearts. Dreams. What are the dreams of your church? As you've talked to other folks in your congregation, what do they dream for? The demographic of the church is kind of like the people, but who's there? What's the age range of your church? And then your church personality. And this is a little different, but what's your church personality? Is it an artsy church? Is it a fancy church? Is it a high church? The kind of church you can come in your jeans and your sneakers and nobody will look at you crazy. Or if you come in like the whole suit and everyone's like, oh, that's not it. What is your church personality? Um, who do we say we are? Somebody says, tell me about your church. Say, oh, we are a church that love. We are a church who do you say you are as a church? And then if you have one, what is your church's mission or vision? If you don't have one, like, what is something that is often said in your church? Is it we're better together, or we're united as one, or I worked at a church and I promised their motto should have been we love to eat. Um, so what's something? Right. So I'm gonna ask. This is what I'm gonna give you instruction, and then you can make your move. I want you to grab a piece of paper, sit with your church group. I think you're going to be two tables, right? Um, and I want you to all work on your own piece of paper, but work collectively. So you all have the same thing on your pieces of paper, because when we're finished, you're going to mix up. I'm going to put you with different people. So I don't want you to have, or you can take a picture of it if you like, if you choose to record it. It's up to you. So you're going to get a piece of paper. Feel free to draw the church if you like. I just am more interested in the things around it. Any questions, comments, concerns? Anybody need a pen? So let's just hear, what are some assets that your church has? Like what, yeah, let's start with assets. Just yell them out to me. What are some assets that your church has? Facility. People, facilities, income, yes. Good leadership. Uh-huh. Visionary. Uh-huh. Yes. You're on a roll. I love it. What else? Taking land. Land. Oh, you could do lots of things with a lot of land. Yes. 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 Yeah. What else? History of doing big projects. Okay. All right. Pastoral leadership. Did unity, harmony, and respect for one another. I love it. While y'all were doing this, did any one of these pieces feel overwhelming? Like, oh, it's just too hard to answer. Yeah, there was no right or wrong answer here, y'all. Just trying to get your brains open. Yeah. Anybody else have a challenge with any of these? Which one of these got the most energy for you all? You just were rolling right along.
Dreams.
Oh, that's good. Um, Initially, I wanted to do this exercise, and then I thought afterwards we come together and you could match up your greatest desire and this, like who you actually are. But I feel in my heart and my spirit, I want to do that. I want this to be a conversation starter when you go back home, because I think more people have to be around the table. Because the concern is we'll match those up and y'all will start to plan to do things, right? And the right folks aren't around the table. I imagine you have a lot of land. We start talking. You might dream up a whole carnival out there. And then we get to your finance team and they're like, are you nuts? We can't do that. Or we start to think about your giant parking lot. We pull out one of these great ideas that we have, and you're like, we're going to put the tables out there, and we're going to do this. And you go back, and you look at the church calendar, and there's no way that's going to happen, and all your dreams will be crushed. And I don't want that to happen. So I hope that this actually can be a conversation starter for you to go home. What needs to happen? Who needs to be around the table? Right? For you to say, we went to this thing on Saturday. And we had this really cool conversation of like who our church is and what we have and all these great things that we already have in our hand. And we have all of these dreams. And we need to have a conversation about how to make that, not even how to make reality, but we just have to have we'd love to have some conversation around it, right? Because again, we run the risk of doing what we always do, is jump the gun. And we'll start to plan. We haven't talked to anybody. We haven't listened to anyone. We can start to scratch an itch that's not itchy, right? Because I think churches, we do that a lot. We start to form these big, wonderful things that I no doubt would be fantastic, but maybe it's not for the community. Maybe it's not even for the church right now. So I want to give this to you as a conversation starter when you go back home. And here are a couple. I'll share this with you because it might be helpful when you're having that conversation. To describe what you did in this activity, right? This is what got our brains working, started to move. And then what challenges are we facing right now? So we have great ideas, but really what are the challenges? What could come against us and stop us from moving forward? And then what would be the greatest resource we could receive? What else do we need? This is actually a question of the gap. So you might say, we have great ideas, we won't have a whole lot of money. You realize that actually wasn't, you didn't have a whole, so then what do you do? Who do you need to talk to? Who do you need to partner with? We're going to talk about that in a minute. So roadblocks, right? We're talking about church growth, even ministries and projects and things that y'all might be considering. So here are a couple roadblocks that I've seen working with churches and coaching and consulting. There are 4 things: a mindset of scarcity, poor communication, fear, somebody mentioned that earlier, and narrow mindset. So that's what I have here in the first column. In the second column, just have some questions to kind of guide that along. So we're talking about a mindset of scarcity, right? Where we speak from this sense of like there's not enough. And so here's some questions that I think about when I think of a mindset of scarcity. How's the environment? Like, am I thinking like what is causing this mindset of scarcity? Is it the language of the church? Is it as a pastor, is it how I'm preaching from the pulpit? Like, am I preaching a mindset of scarcity? Like, y'all, we really have to buckle down. I say that I'm not picking on anybody. I've done it myself. When the offering plate has gotten a little low, and said to the congregation, y'all need to come on. God has been too good. We have to put a little bit, we have to, kind of work it out. That's really a mindset that there's not enough, right? What kind of space is dedicated to youth? We think there's not, and again, I'm pointing out some of those demographics that we talked about earlier along the way, right? Mindset of scarcity. There's not enough space for us to have space just for young people. What if there was a corner? Some of you might already do this. A lot of churches will have space in the sanctuary right in the front for kids to just be. There's coloring books and blocks and balls, and they don't mind the fun happening in the sanctuary because it gives life. You actually get to see and hear the kids. That might scare the bejesus out of some of y'all in this room, to hear kids in the sanctuary, but it really does kind of changes your mindset. Not that, oh, there are no kids, but when you hear it, I love hearing a baby cry in the middle. I don't care; it doesn't bother me at all, because that means there's a little person in the back, and that's kind of hope for the church right there. There's somebody little that we get to pour into. Um, a mindset of scarcity. Do we know folks' names? Do they know yours? um, when you were trying to think of the people, right? It's like, oh, what's that lady? She sits on the left side. She wears the blue coat. Sometimes she brings her puppy. Like a mindset of scarcity. We don't know anybody. It's 'cause maybe we haven't asked their name. We haven't asked where they live, where they're coming from. Poor communication is a roadblock. Do people know when stuff happens at your church? How do they know when stuff happens at your church? Is there a printed thing? Is there a virtual thing? One of the blocks for folks engaging is because they don't know. Is there a newsletter? Who gets the newsletter? Do you have a database of folks? Do you know where they are, where they've come from? Are you prepared for them when they come through the door? Or is Sunday, and well, I would even pick on Sunday, but you have something, everybody's kind of running around. But are you ready for guests? Are you ready for members as they're coming in? Fear is a big roadblock. Your church is investing money, time, and energy into the ministry. I always think of a budget. The budget tells the story of your church. It's a narrative. It's a story. Worked at a church where almost all the money went to personnel. There was no money going to mission. A couple $100 like went to mission, maybe once a year, or when somebody said, oh, we should do something, like we should give back to something. But just looking at the budget, I could tell, oh, there's not a lot of mission happening here. There was very little money dedicated to young people. There was zero money dedicated to seniors. There was zero money dedicated to pretty much any other thing other than paying the staff. Pay your staff, that's really important. But also, your budget tells a story of where your heart is, where your treasure is. And so, fear of, like, if we give to missions, there won't be enough to pay our folks. There's some different ways to think about how to do missions, which brings me to the next one, is a narrow mindset. Who can our partners be? Who are the other churches in the area who are doing a great mission? How can we walk alongside them? What if it's not a church and it's a secular organization, but they're doing incredible work? How do we come alongside them to be a part of what they're doing? Then we're combining our resources. Maybe our church has the people and they have the building. Maybe they have the money and we have the building. Maybe we have the parking lot and they have the people. So you bring the people, we'll give you our parking lot to, do this thing together. But a narrow mindset says we have to do it on our own. We can't partner with anybody. We can't reach out. It's going to be too messy. It's going to be too much. Who's in your community? Almost every community has somebody who's doing something. They might not be really even a part of an organization. It was a young man at the last church I worked with, and bless his heart, he's 24, and he really wanted to do a toy drive. Like, it was just on his heart to do a toy drive, and everybody turned him down. Everybody turned. He literally was going through the neighborhood, church to everybody. Can I use your building? I just want to do a toy drive. And they're like, no, it's a liability. Like, we don't know you. You're not connected to anything. Where are you getting the toys? And he's like, I'm asking people. They're like, absolutely no. And so I was new at the church, and I was the interim, so I was doing whatever I wanted to do. And they said, go talk, like, keep going down the street. You might run into somebody. And he came to the church. And I thought it was a great idea. A young adult who wanted to do something for the community. We had a chance to partner with him. So I took it to our board, and at first they were like, no, absolutely not. So we get a chance. We can't do a toy drive on our own. We didn't have the people, and nobody had the like heart for it the way he did. We get an opportunity to not only partner with this young adult, we have a chance to like give back to the community. Like, and we can surround, like I said, this was the church that did eat. You can do food. And they were like, oh, well then, yeah, let's do that. So we partnered with this 24-year-old. He somehow managed to partner with his friends and family, and they got all of these toys. Our congregation got toys. He set up in our fellowship hall, and then he put out virtual flyers because he's a millennial, and he was like, paper, what's that? He sent out virtual flyers, social media, and it was amazing seeing people hadn't come into these doors from the community in a long time. So it kind of sparked something for the congregation that we don't have to do everything. But they had been so just like narrow-minded and focused, like we have to do everything, that they didn't want to reach out to anybody else, especially this kid who wasn't a part of an organization. The beautiful part of it is that he stayed. He was like, oh, everybody else put me out. No, everybody else turned me away. And he stayed and became a part of our church family. So these are just a couple of things when I think of roadblocks for yourselves. And you don't have to talk about your own church, but maybe other churches. Don't mention names. What are some other roadblocks you see that churches might be running into these days when it comes to growth and just moving forward? Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit more, right? So you have folks coming in from different parts all over. It's hard to connect with them. What might be some ways to connect with folks who are coming from all over the place? Food. Yeah, yeah. You bribe them with brunch, right? Stick around for brunch. Well, look, how can you start to build relationship with folks when they actually don't live in your neighborhood, but they come to your church? And so we come back to the church avatar, right? Like what's the story? What's the story that those folks tell? Oh, that's my church over there in that neighborhood. Tell me about that neighborhood. Oh, I don't know. My church is there. And then when Sunday's over, I'm out. Not coming. Don't ask me to come Monday through Saturday. Maybe on a Saturday if there's food, I might come on Saturday. But if not, like I don't want to do missions in that community. Does that mean then that we say, oh well, they don't live here, that's fine because this is our church, this is our community. What about they're still our members, right? Is there a way still for them to connect? I'm gonna just end the sentence right there. Is there a way for them to connect? If it hasn't been a part of your story, of your church story in the past, it's going to be really hard because those roots are deep of like, this is our church, especially for churches who maybe back in the day had a lot of money. You didn't need anybody else. You didn't need to go out into the community. You were the church. People came to you. You didn't have to go out. And so now this mindset has to shift. They're not coming through the doors anymore. So guess what? We got to go out there. That might even be beyond our community into other communities. What if the members who live in other communities still had their church, but took their church to their community? Like, where can you come to my neighborhood? Like, if that's the language of our church, come to my neighborhood. We're going to partner with the give me a nice organization here in Winnipeg that people that do things. What's a nice organization? I don't know. You're like, I'm new here. I don't know. What is it called? Winnipeg Harvest. There's Winnipeg Harvest in my community, right? I live over here. My church is over here. But I'm going to make a connection with Winnipeg Harvest on behalf of my church, right? And so now your church becomes outside of your community and it becomes a part of the larger community, the whole city. It's getting us out of this box of like everything. Not only, I think we've run over with the truck that's out of the four walls, and I've said it a lot today. But I'm thinking even beyond the church walls. Like, what if we went beyond the community walls into the communities that don't have like they maybe don't have that church? What can you take out there, especially for the members who live out there? Might not be another church plant, but you can take Jesus somewhere, right? Jesus is everywhere, so you can take the Jesus with you. Um, yeah, I think there's some hope and there's some dreaming that can happen to keep those connected. I also wondering more when I ask the question about just those members personally, right? So if they're just coming to church, I worship, and then I'm gone, how do we stay connected to them, right? So not asking them to do more, but how do we stay connected to those folks? That's the challenge, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Small groups, right? you know some people kind of cringe when they hear small group or like, oh, that's gonna be so much work, but it builds such great community, right? Especially when you have folks who you're not going to see them at the grocery store during the week. You're not going to see them. They're not going to drop by the church and just pop by, like, hey pastor, how you doing? They're working in their own community. They're working downtown. Some of them might even commute to other parts of the country. How do you stay connected to those folks? Small groups is a fantastic way to do it. Be very careful that those small groups don't turn into cliques and they don't turn into like this closed, because that can happen really fast, right? Like, this is our small. I've been in a lot of churches like, this is our small group. We don't let anybody else. I'm like, break that up. You're done. No more. Like, disperse. So you got to be careful with small groups. It doesn't become like little cliques, but there's such beauty in small groups because then we get to know each other. But if there are a couple small groups that you gave folks the opportunity, like, here's some material or here's an idea, there might be some people that you work with, invite them to a small group. How you get outside, that could happen virtually. As a part of a small group some years ago, it was 3 ladies from our church, and then everybody brought new to the city, so I had no friends. But everybody else brought a friend, and we'd meet at a woman's house, and she'd make curry and roti, and we'd sit around, and we'd spend about 25 minutes talking about the actual Bible lesson and 2 hours eating and laughing and becoming this sweet little community. But it was even half of the group wasn't even church folks. It was people from the outside. One lady had her own church. They didn't have small groups, and the other ladies didn't go to church at all, but they found community there. They knew, when somebody passed away in their family, that they had this church who would back them up. So what would it look like to even do small groups outside of your church and invite other people in? There's interest group. I hear there's some cyclists here, people who like to ride bikes. Well, that's a small group, y'all. It's a small group. But what would it look like? You gather up on a Saturday. Hey, y'all, here's a quick scripture for today. Boom, boom, boom. This is what Jesus said. Jesus is awesome. Let's pray. Let's ride. You ride. Or hey, as you're riding, think about, here's a thought. Let's think about that. All the people are knitting. People are doing all these really kind of cool things. It doesn't have to be like we're going to talk about the book of James. Like, we can do other things, and guess what? We can incorporate the Bible. We can incorporate prayer. We can incorporate spiritual practices. But sometimes there needs to be a different kind of draw. Sometimes people want community. They want a sense of belonging. Yes? Any comments, concerns? Me? No? Oh, the computer. All right. I'm going to stop for a minute before we go any further. And I want to ask you all, what have you heard or felt or sensed today? Like, what is sticking with you? We've talked a lot about doing part, right? And all of you here are leaders. Yes, all of you are doing something in church. You're busy folks. Is there anybody, you just came here because it's Saturday, you heard there was lunch and cookies? Yes. Okay, good. All of you, I can already, you all do all the things. You wouldn't be here if you didn't. But here is something that I just want to quickly share with you. I am deeply invested in the soul of leaders, right? We can do all the things. I have no doubt that y'all are going to go back and maybe take some of these ideas and stir up some great ministries. You're going to do all the things. But you are a human person, and there is a place for meeting. There is a place for rest, and there is a place for you to be replenished. And so the last thing I want to say to you all, this was not on the agenda, but last night I was like, wait a minute, we're talking a lot about doing, and I can't leave a group of leaders without talking about being for a few minutes. I will not leave you without saying that you will not be able to do all the things if you don't find time to rest yourself. You don't take time for Sabbath, take time to be with your families, take time to be with yourself, take time not only to serve the food, but to be able to replenish yourself. So there are a couple things, right? Taking time to reflect, especially in days like this. Carve out a little time to just sit with it before you go and talk to somebody else about it. And I wonder what it would look like for reflection if it's not already to be a part of your regular routine on Sundays. Instead of like, moving into the next thing, what if like just sit back for a minute and reflect before you move on to the next ministry, the next meeting, the next thing? What does it mean to take some time to reflect, to listen? When's the last time, and we talked about deep listening of other people, but when was the last time you actually sat and listened to yourself? That you sat and listened for God to speak to you? A little stillness. I think Jesus said some things about that, right? He was the best with stillness and solitude, just taking a little time. Jesus was always where? On the other side of the ocean, or the other side of the lake, up the mountain, on the side of the road. Jesus was either always napping or eating. That's why I love him the most. He was always napping or eating. But oftentimes, like, leaders find themselves, we don't stop to have lunch. If we're having lunch, it's a working lunch, it's a meeting lunch. But what would it like just have a lunch to have lunch, right? Sit down, chew food, swallow it, and be grateful for it. So taking a little time to listen to what God might be saying to you. I do encourage you sometime tonight, like, what did God say to me today? I was writing a lot, I was talking a lot, but what really is God trying to say to me? To take a pause, take a break, man. Take a break. I know it's really hard, especially when you might have multiple parishes, you might have kids and grandkids and people who live in your house. You have all these things to do, but I promise you, if you do not take a pause, you will run out of fuel before you're ready. And I know I'm probably preaching to the choir. You probably already know this. You've probably been through enough ministry and life to know this. This is just a reminder. This is your friendly Saturday reminder to take a pause, take a break. Don't stop learning, right? And then for some leaders, we get to a place where, like, we've learned enough, right? We've gone to seminary, we've gotten the next degree, we've gone to the conferences. But I'm talking about, what can you learn from the folks in your congregation? What are you learning about the people in your community? Things that you might not get a certificate or a degree for. What are you learning? How are you pouring into yourself? What is a passion that you have for yourself that's going to keep you going for the ministry work? Because I don't know, I mean, I'm just learning it. Maybe a couple years ago, it's like everything doesn't revolve around my church, which leads me to this one: live your life. Yes. Everything is not my church life. I have a family, I have friends. If I'm not careful, I can get so wrapped up into ministry that I forget I have these folks. I forget that, oh my goodness, I do want to take a trip. I do want to take a little break. Um, to go visit and explore new places. So, this is not anything that you've never heard, I'm sure, but I couldn't leave you after we've talked so much about doing, without just reminding you to be, and reminding you to take a little time for yourself every once in a while.